When I was a younger man, I was a waiter at Perkins, and I received tips. I also received tips for a couple of years as a valet. And folks that receive tips aren't just waiters and valets, but also housekeepers, bartenders, delivery drivers, massage therapists, hairdressers, taxi drivers, tour guides. Those are the type of people we're talking about trying to help with this bill, trying to not tax. And as representatives, these are great folks for us to target. And as Christians, we should always be trying to help the poor. Now, I want you to think for a second about the last tip you gave. Who was the last tip that you gave money to? Now, when you think about that tip, how much of it went to taxes? When you were giving that tip, did you think about a portion of this money, this $10 I'm giving for a tip, 7 of it is going to get to this person, 3 of it they're going to have to pay in taxes? I bet you didn't think like that. In my entire life, I've never thought of a tip like that in my life. I've always thought, well, if I'm tipping $10, they're getting $10. I've never thought about the tax ramifications. And why is that? Because it's different. Tipping is different than income in other ways. When I go to a restaurant and I pick out a meal, a transaction is occurring. I'm saying, okay, I'll pay this number, this, $12 for this meal. In exchange, if you bring me this meal, I'll pay you that money. That's a transaction. We've decided to purchase something, they're offering something, there's a contract being entered into. But the restaurant doesn't look at us and say, well, we made your meal, but we're not going to bring it out unless you tip. The restaurant doesn't do that. They're bringing the meal out, and their staff, who they're paying as well, are going to bring that meal out whether you're going to tip or not. And when we tip at the end of a meal or at the end of a service, it's not for that service. It's different. It is for appreciation. We're doing that to be helpful, to be considerate toward others, to appreciate the fact that you received good service and these people treated you well. And it is more like a gift than it is a transactional income. And it never should have been taxed. We shouldn't have taxed these folks. And we don't necessarily need to tax these folks. Greedy government got in the way and wanted to tax everything every chance they got. But this is a situation we never should have been involved in. We never should have taxed. Tips are not our main revenue source in Wisconsin. That's not where we're getting your tax dollars from. We receive according to the Department of Revenue, we receive $33.7 million a year, so that's $67 million per biennium from tips. That's it. Now, we have a $111 billion budget that we just agreed to. So that $33.7 million a year, $67 million a biennium, that's only 1/1100. I don't know how to say that word. I was trying to figure out, how do you say 1 and 1?
It's really small.
Think about how small of a piece of the pie that really is. 1 and 1100 of the budget. If I can't even say the number, it can't be very big. And in comparison, that number isn't very big compared to just even the surpluses we've had recently. And we're receiving that money from these folks, the poorest folks in our community, and this is a chance for us to cut that. Now, there's another factor, another reason to do this, another reason I really think we got to do it, and we got to do it now, and that's confusion. We don't want these tip earners to have to navigate a more complex tax system than they already have. And if we give them a deduction federally, but we don't give it on state, every single tip earner, when they're paying their taxes, has to know that exception, has to know that issue. And people are going to screw it up. It's more difficult than it is now. It's more difficult than necessary. And really, we generally, as a tax principle, try to align our federal income tax structure like the federal government. So if the federal government does it, we really should do it, if for no reason other than to avoid confusion. Now, one thing I wanted to point out for the folks that, might be learning more about this, and that is we're talking about a deduction. I would love it. It would be in a perfect world, they would just not have to provide that. They would not have to provide that they had received that money, that tip. But they are going to still have to keep track, and then they get a deduction at the end of this. So they still have to keep track of the amount that they had received in tips. They report that to the federal and state, and then it gets deducted. In a perfect world, they wouldn't have to do that. They'd just be able to keep it and not have to tell anybody about it. But there's a couple of major problems with that if we didn't, record it and note it. The first is that those tip earners, they wouldn't have that income on their taxes. And then when they want to get loans from a bank or something, the bank wouldn't see that income. That income would be invisible to them. So think about how difficult it would be. It would make it more difficult for those tip earners to borrow money for their houses or their cars or that type of thing. So that would be a big problem. The second problem is that there's a limit to this deduction. The limit is $25,000. So if you're receiving more than $25,000 in tips, we're not going to let you deduct that. You have to pay taxes on that. If you're making more than $25,000 on tips, you're not really that targeted group that we're trying to help, the working class. And also, we don't want this to be used or abused by folks that are trying to get creative with the way they pay their taxes. And then the third is just regarding money laundering and preventing money laundering by having invisible money. It's never really a good idea for the tax system to have invisible money. So those are the three reasons, and there's probably more, that we do have to have them record it and tell the government what they've received in tips, and then that money gets deducted. So with that, I'm going to go to my senator, Andre Jacques.